Hello and welcome to Keeping It Real. I am Joy and I am your host. And today is September 15th, 2022. And I'm very happy you're able to join me on this video presentation. We're just going to dive right into the presentation. I'm going to be discussing Atlantis and the connection to the star forts, which I have studied for the past couple years, and kind of present some of the material that I have gone over and studied myself. And also, when I go into these ancient history studies and look at different information and images and everything that's presented, I try to make the parallel to what the scriptures are also telling us about our past history. And, I kind of got on the trail here of these giants and these Nephilim some time back, because I found that very interesting, because when I was looking at some of the architect from the, let's say, like the World's Fair and like these star forts, I was just blown away. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because to me, these are also remnants of a past civilization, and a lost one at that, that built a lot of these structures that we're seeing today. And of course, during the 17th, 18th period, maybe even before the 17th century, we see a repurposing of these structures. And, like for instance, the star forts, they're repurposed as, forts. To put their cannons on and protect, different regions and areas and countries. And, it just looked totally ridiculous when I was looking at the images and looking at these star forts. I was thinking to myself, this just can't be. I can't see people during a time period when we, especially looking at the ones that were situated here in the U.S., where this would have been a time of the horse and buggy days, limited tools, of course. And, when we're talking about machinery, they certainly didn't have a lot of that type of machinery like what we would have today. That was something that kind of in the mid to late 18th century, they were just starting to utilize. And it was still not the type of machinery that would be able to excavate these types of structures. And when we look at the images I'm going to be showing you, you'll see why that is. So getting back to the story of Atlantis now, that's interesting because Plato tells us the story. And Plato, if you're not familiar with him, he was a philosopher, a storyteller back in 360 BC. And he's the one that told the initial story of the people, the Atlanteans, the people of Atlantis, who he said were very advanced and technologically advanced at that. Okay, he specifically says that in his writings, which his written records are in existence today. So anyone can go and reference these stories that he told. And of course, these stories were passed down through the generations, and they were like 9,000 years old. So, that kind of puts us towards the last part of the last ice age that we had. And we know after the last ice age, we had a cataclysmic event, which is scientifically proven. Everyone knows that, and they call it the Younger Dryas period, where a lot of the scientific community on the mainstream, they say there was a comet or asteroid, something that hit the planet and threw it, where the planet started warming, and then it threw it back into the ice age abruptly, almost like overnight. Well, that would do, yes, those kind of impacts would do significant damage to the planet. But you still have to account for all the different ice ages that we've had and all the other, looking at scripture, we've obviously had other things that impacted the earth that melted structures. And I've seen melted brick, and I'm going to show you some images of some, what I believe were polar, or not polar, but sun outburst, like a micronova that impacted the Earth not once but many times, and that these are on an actual cycle as all of the stars in the universe. And I did find a lot of the information on NASA's website, believe it or not. And they're, they don't want you looking at our sun though, but you can look at every other sun out there and know that they're all doing a nova, and they're a lot larger than ours, but it doesn't exempt our sun. But no one, you're going to have a hard time finding that information, but it is there. And in one of my future videos, I will go in depth on these micronovas and these plasma ejections from the sun, from our sun, and really go into detail and what that actually will do to the planet. But it does coincide with the story of Plato, so we know this just wasn't a mythological story that he had made up, because there's too many truths to it. And although he said that the islands that they lived on were in concentric circles, maybe somewhere in the 9,000 year time frame when these stories are being shared, just like the scripture, it was in a lot of different pieces and it, shared throughout time. And so we have different writings at different points of time. And there's still other books that aren't included in our our Christian Bible today. We know that. Just like the Book of Enoch isn't in there. And Jubilees. I mean, I can name a lot of other books that aren't included, but that doesn't mean that those stories about the Nephilim and these giants and other things that are part of our history, it doesn't mean that they don't exist, because they do. They're just in other writings that have not been included in our scriptures today. So it said that the island, and it did say that there was several islands, okay, which to me, the concentric circles reminds me of these concentric star forts, because they have the concentric waterways and canals, which Plato also describes that these, within the circles and the land, there was all these canal systems, these elaborate canal systems and magnificent fountains and other beautiful art that these Atlantean people possessed. And obviously, being highly advanced, they also were able to navigate the seas, probably the air too, I would imagine. And, when we look at this and we do the comparison, and let's look at some photos here. I just want to give you some ideas of some of these other images. And first of all, I want to go look at, before I show you some of the images, I want to go to Google Earth and just show you where Plato had stated that the Atlantis actually was one of the islands, which was one of the larger ones that they lived on, which he says was near the Pillars of Hercules, which today we call it the Straits of Gibraltar, or the Rock of Gibraltar, which you may have heard of. So let's go take a look at that. And we're going to go right here. I've already kind of pulled up Google Earth here for you. And the area that we're talking about is, you have your Atlantic over here, and you have Africa down here, and then you have, France and Spain over in this region. So if we look over here, first of all, these two particular land masses are what is referred to today as the Straits of Gibraltar. Okay, this area here, because you see the ocean, which is darker in color, that's between the two land masses. Then if we go in closer, we see in this area, which is the Rock of Gibraltar, which is on this little rock area here. And believe it or not, I believe this is this entire circular area, and I have images of this, and you could see the remnants, and you could see man-made islands here. Clearly you could see them, but there was also an underground tunnel system, which tells me that this was exactly where Atlantis was. And why they have not been able to locate any remnants is because if you have these, the Atlantic Ridge, of course, is pretty close to this area as well. And you have these major cataclysms happening, which obviously are moving land masses, which Plato says that, there was these giant earthquakes that caused the entire Atlantis to fall into the depths of the ocean. Well, if you have that sliding into the ocean, you're going to have other, sediment piled on top of that throughout the different cataclysms that came and earthquakes that came after that, because we know there's a lot of earthquakes on the seafloors and other things going on there. And, I did notice a thickening of the coastal area around this region on the ocean floor. You could clearly see it. Like if you kind of come out, you could see this thickening area and you see little rifts, which tells me that it's buried very deep underneath the ocean floor. And they're looking on the surface and they're not going to find anything on the surface. So, and I'm talking the surface of the ocean floor, but there is definitely evidence on this Rock of Gibraltar, because this Rock of Gibraltar has an underground fortress and canal system, which I'm going to show you. And okay, this image here, now this is one of the, this is underneath the Rock of Gibraltar, as it's referred to today. And this tunnel system, like many of the tunnel systems that we find, that I have done research on, which, I've only done a few, but I plan to do more. And I can tell you that most of the star forts I've done already on the larger ones all have these underground tunnel systems. If they're made even on some of them on these man-made islands, which I'll show you images of. But this particular one is still on the landmass, and you see this underwater spring here going through it, and it goes hundreds of miles. And you see the side here of this walkway area with this gated structure, which looks to be very old, and it looks to be, kind of from a Romanistic time period, which a lot of the architect that we're finding today, which I've showed some of that in my previous videos, and remnants from these old World's Fairs, including what you find in Rome and other areas. You find this type of architecture with these massive columns and domes, and even the cathedrals I had showed you. It was like these were built for way larger people than what we are today, more like 13-footers. And it would be much easier for someone that is a giant to build these types of structures and, be technologically advanced to be able to dig out these types of structures. Now, yes, we can dynamite through, and, as we did in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, and even today, we dig tunnels, we have, they have big machines now that can, carve these things out pretty smoothly. But back in the time period where we're given a false narrative, it's telling us and expecting us to believe that they were building this type of structure here, which is also underneath the Rock of Gibraltar. This is the other tunnel system, and it's all outlined and lined all the way through, going for a long distance with this brickwork, which is what we find underneath most of these star forts. We don't find, something kind of blown out like this. And even so, what would be the purpose of the canal system and the water going through here if they were in fact, this area was built by, people of a wartime back in the 16th century, which is what the story's told on this one, this particular remnant here of a old star fort. which, does not coincide with what they could have been capable of building. And then this is that same region, and you can still see on the landmass here, you see these outlines of, our imprints and outlines of, a previous star fort that was here, a very large one. And you can still see some of the points on the land masses there. Here's another one. Now all these pictures were from the 1950s, so they're pretty old. I had to go do some digging around, but I was able to locate these. And this is before they built on them. So look at this landmass here. You see these circular imprints, you see lines, and you see perfect lines at that, which we do with a lot of the star forts. And let's take a look at some of the star forts from around the world. And we'll start with this one, where now the picture may start to come together for you. When Plato was talking about these eccentric circles, or concentric, sorry, and these elaborate canal systems and waterways that surrounded these circular enclosures or land masses, this is what he's describing. This is exactly what he's describing. And this here is in Spain, this particular one that we're looking at up on the screen. And you see it's got this huge, fort in the center. Of course, this one was repurposed. And you see all this massive mound area that goes completely on the outline of the star fort, which we know there was a lot of mounds here in the U.S. that had been excavated where they found bones of giants. And let's think about that now. Somebody being in a horse and buggy building these types of star forts. Now this one is in the U.S. and this is Fort J, and most of them are situated near the oceans or a large body of water, but some of them aren't. Some of them are just out in the middle of nowhere, where there's not even a city or a place that they, if we go with their narrative, their false narrative stating that these were used to, fight civil wars and world wars and all this other jarva that they give us. Well, why build them out in the middle of nowhere when there's nothing to protect? And then they position these cannons on them. And to me, these star forts held a greater purpose than being used as forts for war, in my opinion. And they're just magnificent. I mean, look at this. This one's got homes, and it's almost got a whole little town sitting in the center of it. And look at the canal, how perfectly carved that is. And do you think people from the 16th, 17th, 18th century can do this and fill the center with these mounds of dirt? You see how small the homes are that are in here, and the people even smaller, like little tiny ants, like little tiny grasshoppers. Sound familiar? And these are just too magnificent. This one here, look, this is a complete man-made island. Forget the star fort in the center. Look at the island. Getting dirt and building an island? Do you honestly think that people, settlers coming into the U.S., or anyone else, for that matter, in our lifetime, not just, our lifetime today, but going back to, let's say, as far as the 15th century, as some of these date back to the 15th century. And if that is the case, then we are definitely going backwards here, because our structures aren't as beautiful and elaborate and detailed. Our art isn't. I've seen solid slabs of marble being carved into these delicate humans that look so real. You could see their veins in their hands and feet. And I believe those are also remnants from an older civilization such as the Atlanteans that possess the type of technology and the skill to be able to create those types of art and other remnants that we see. Speaking about the architect and these star forts, because they were technologically advanced and they were a larger people. And this matches Plato's story. And the fact that these were positioned all over. Let's go back here. And it's, it just starts to make sense. It's like pieces of the puzzle start coming together. And you look at the star fort. Some of them had castles in the center of them. Some of them complete cities. I kid you not, and you'll see some images here. Now this one probably had a waterway, because you can see the areas within the star fort surrounding it, where there was probably water in there. And most of them, like I said, have these underground tunnel systems, which I know the governments on these star forts that they've repurposed. And, obviously they've destroyed a lot of these star forts and other structures, especially the ones left over from these World's Fairs that went back in the 17th, 18th century, totally decimated them. And there's only just a very few remnant left over, which I do have a bonus video, bonus video. I'm going to show you some images of the one in San Francisco, and you'll be able to see for yourself just how massive these structures were during the World's Fair, according to the false narrative, of course. So, and again, here's another man-made island. So, today, can we really build this today? Let alone in the 17th and 18th century. And our governments, they know all of these are probably connected by massive tunnel systems underground. And one day I'll be hopefully proving that. But they all either had the same architect or copycats. I'm not sure, but they all are laid out almost identical, where they're either on an island. Even our Statue of Liberty, she's on a star fort, okay, and she's on a man-made island. I bet you a lot of you didn't know that, but it's true, and I've done a video on that. But again, we see these massive land areas where these star forts are sitting on top, and I'm just like blown away by this. This one here is just magnificent, and this one is in Spain. And you look at this one and you see there's an entire city sitting within the star fort. And look at the massive canal and how perfectly this is designed and laid out. It's just, it's as remarkable as the pyramids, which today leave, scholars and these archaeologists just scratching their heads, because we can't build them today. We cannot replicate this precision and come up with how they could have built those pyramids. And that whole area over there was covered in ocean water at one time. And I'm going to show you some images which shows exactly that. Actually, let's go take a look at those other images. But these star forts, there's hundreds of them all over the planet. And, if you want to look at more, you're welcome to do your own research. I could spend a long time just going through images and, proving my point here. These certainly fit the Plato's description of Atlantis. And the image you're looking at here in this particular area is in South America, Machu Picchu, which was hit by a cataclysm. And some of the mainstream scientists, they know that this is very old, and they've dated it going back to the last ice age, possibly. There's a lot of speculation still about these areas in South America and, abroad. But they're everywhere, these megalithic sites. I mean, they're just everywhere. But this is a very high elevation, and it's over 10,000 feet up in elevation. And this was actually covered in ocean water. How do they know that? Because they still have embedded fossil and other things from the ocean that are embedded in some of the stone and in the dirt. So they know that these ocean fossils were present. So that means that this entire area had been covered in ocean water, which, if you're going through a polar reversal, magnetic reversal, any kind of change like that would really wreak havoc on the planet, and those oceans would just come we think we know what a big tidal wave is, or a tsunami. These would have nothing, or a tsunami would have nothing on one of these tidal waves that would come up over the landmass, because it would almost empty out the basins of the ocean and throw it over the landmass coming onto the other side. That's how massive and destructive these cataclysmic events can be. And here we're looking at that same region, but we're looking at completely melted stone. That, this was actually a large megalithic site, which there's a lot of other stones in this area that are, weighing hundreds of tons. But this one's completely melted. Why? Because probably it also sustained a high heat source, like a plasma outburst, such as a micronova during a 12,000 year cycle. Here in Egypt, we see the same thing. This is a huge megalithic statue, and these are just strewn all over the place in this part of Egypt. It's pretty close to the pyramids, but you see the scorching and burning that's there on the right side of the statue's face, and actually on the back side as well. And Machu Picchu again, a complete solid stone steps, or whatever this was at one time, totally split in half. So obviously there was, either it was strewn around and split from the water coming up over the land masses, or from the plasma outburst itself, or earthquakes, or all three of the above. But this is another statue that is laying down, split in half, also burned. So, you see how massive these are. So it would have to be something very destructive to be able to throw megalithic 100-ton stones around like tinker toys. And again, this one's in Egypt. You see the burning and scorching here of this megalithic stone. And also the dirt over there, it's like talcum powder, because it was literally cooked at such a high heat, it turned it all into just like powder. And a volcano isn't going to do that, as much as they would like to tell people that. This was a volcanic eruption, or, a meteor impacted this site. Well, there's no remnants in Egypt of a meteor or comet or anything like that. So how do you account for that? And where the meteor hit, yes, we've had places where we see, those impacts, but during around those impactor sites, we don't see this type of damage. So that should tell you something right there. And again, we see more burning and scorching. this is Brian Forster. You see him standing in front of this huge statue, which is in Egypt as well. This one's completely destroyed, melted, and hit. And, these are solid, some of them solid granite. Picture something, for goodness sake, we make pizzas out of brick oven. Okay, so bricks, we know, shouldn't melt, right? Even at a high temperature. So why is it we have these stone structures, which are harder than brick, being melted? And there's other structures that were brick that were melted as well, probably at a later time. And here we are again. And, you have the Andes mountains too. And obviously, if you have waters coming up over the continents, large amounts of water, it really describes what happened in Noah's time. The mountains were even covered, but it also talks about melting of the mountains, if you recall. But, they were, they had to wait for the waters to reside before they came, they stopped on the highest peak, which is in Turkey, on Mount Ararat. And that is also at a very high, 9,000-10,000 elevation. So what does that tell you? That the waters were very, very high. And it took a long time for everything to, go back to normal. But in between that, you're also having these ice ages. And, I do, like I said, I have a video I'll do on that. So I do want to go show you this bonus video quickly, and just kind of give you an idea of some of the structures I wanted to share that were at these world fairs. And, this particular one here is in San Francisco, and I'm going to go back. I'm going to show you the first picture here. And, again, there's a huge canal system, of course. Most of them all these world fairs, they all have the same types of structure, which means what? They all had the same architect. Most of them were happening during a time when there was supposed to be supposedly these world wars going on. So I don't think people's priority would be building out these structures that are this megalithic in size, and waterways and canal systems, especially here in the U.S. when we supposedly had, people gold mining and settlers coming in. They're going to be trying to make a home and grow their food and, do the things that most people do. You want to get shelter, you want to get food, and, you want to take care of your family. And, you're not going to be prioritizing, building structures like this just for amusement. It's just not going to happen. And especially something this size, it doesn't fit with the people of that time frame. These things are huge. And then to think that they said that they were built as temporary structures is totally ludicrous. There I am. You see me at the very bottom base of this huge pillar. And to give you, an idea of the sheer size of these things, they're massive. Now, this one is a historical site now, and it was preserved, luckily, because all the other ones, very few survived. Because after these World's Fairs, either there was a great fire, and this happens all around the world. We hear these great fires, ridiculous stories that happen that burnt these structures down, okay? Or they were destroyed by a civil war or something ridiculous. And, or they tore them down because they were just temporary buildings. And, and go look at my video from the World's Fair in Chicago and you'll see what I'm talking about. And you just see how massive this is. So picture that. They're going to do something this elaborate. This is like the stuff we see over in Europe, and Rome and places like that, and most of those large pillars that are like this were, many of them, knocked over and split in half from a cataclysm that had taken place, probably during the time of Atlantis. Same one. And that's what we're seeing. And now they did do some repair work, and they've replaced, this was the the arts building is what they called it during the San Francisco Fair, which was in the early, like very early 1900s, is what the narrative tells us. How true that is remains to be seen. So, in my opinion, these were already here. And again, they were repurposed to be an introduction to people coming in here to the United States, a new area, as we have found with many of these structures, including the star forts that were already here and repurposed. So, but they did replace some of these pillars and some of the statues that we see, and you could clearly see the difference of the work that, when you want to compare the original work to the newer repair work, there's no comparison. The statues look, and I was there looking up close, so I could really see the difference. And, to me, you could see they just could not replicate the type of detail that went into the original structure. And this area right here, this is a huge dome. I mean, it's absolutely huge, just like the columns. And you see these angels all surrounding the inner side of the dome. Absolutely beautiful and elaborate, which is what we see in a lot of the megalithic cathedrals. And, when we hear the stories of the Atlantean people, this sounds